Hello there, we are your hosts Vivek and Pavitra from the Agile Coach Podcast. In this podcast, we bring fresh perspectives to you through our interviews with thought leaders in Agile coaching, facilitation, business analysis, and product management roles. Enjoy.
I've been a product manager now for about, I would say almost 3 to 4 years. And it's been quite this journey. I think I've learned a lot about, tech products and essentially, how to kind of understand what needs to be solved and what problems need to be focused on to really ultimately produce the right results for both the business and the product itself. So from product management, I was actually a data analyst. And prior to that, my background is in healthcare, especially as a pre-medicine student. So I had no idea what the tech world was about, what product management was about. And just because you were involved in this journey for me, I had to kind of switch 360 from going to med school to really becoming a product manager and learning everything about what this entails. So really, I think in this podcast, would love to give it. And especially since I was switching, as Vivek bounced around with the idea so many times. And I was always like, I don't have X, Y, and Z to become a product manager. So I think the first thing that you don't need to become a product manager is a technical background. It's good to have an understanding of how SaaS products work. And you can just understand that by a simple Google search and watching videos, but you don't need to know how to code. You don't need a degree in computer science. And especially now, as I'm working with students who want to be product managers, I can see that that is what stops a lot of people from becoming a product manager. But as someone from who's biology background, you don't need that at all. I think we covered some really good ones that is often overlooked and is masked under being technical and having an MBA and stuff. So definitely I agree with all those. I think one skill that's also very important for a product manager is having critical thinking skills. So really look at what the problem is at hand and work collaboratively with your teams to come up with the solution that balances need of the customer, the business, and while it's technically feasible. And when you're actually taking a problem and you're executing and breaking it down to tactical pieces, that's when the critical thinking skills really comes into play. I think it's really important to break things down into smaller pieces and really find a way to tie everything together to the long-term vision. Yeah. I think it's really important, especially with emotional intelligence, because in the field, there are a lot of different priorities, as you mentioned. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes you do have angry stakeholders asking you for strict deadlines and asking you to release something when you know it shouldn't be released. And that's when you can exercise your emotional intelligence to really separate the problem from the people that are requesting those problems and understand the why behind what they're asking for and ultimately communicate with them in a way that is, again, as you said, self-managed, because you are dealing with a lot of different stakeholders, a lot of different priorities, a lot of different decisions that have to be made, and sometimes those decisions can be taken personally. So it's important to separate the problem space from personal space. That's why emotional intelligence is so important.
Yeah, thanks so much, Vivek, and thanks for inviting me here. And hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Like you said, I work at Microsoft as a product manager right now. And for everybody out there who's a gamer, I don't work in Xbox, but I do work in machine learning models, which is pretty cool. And one of my favorite perks about being at Microsoft or being at Microsoft is that I get to test sometimes some of the new cool stuff that Xbox is doing. And as much as I would love to talk about it, I can't, but it's really cool. Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that you can find out there about product management. And some of the most typical things that you can hear about it is that product managers are these mini CEOs of a product, or that product managers are in the middle of customers, technology, and business. But in reality, product management depends on so many other things. It's not the same to be a PM at a startup versus a large company versus a software or hardware product. So it really depends on so many factors. But at a high level, product managers, we are the storytellers in the group. We are the connection between all the different parties that come together to solve the customer problem. That's our number one priority. And yes, product managers, we set the vision, we set the strategy, we create roadmaps and backlogs and talk to customers all the time. And we also have to talk about different business languages. Like we talk geek, we talk data scientists, we talk business intelligence, finance, marketing, and so many other things that you can think of. But the number one thing, like I said, is about the customer. So we have to talk customer. We have to understand their problems. And going back to the definitions that I talked about, one thing that I really don't like about saying that we're the mini CEOs is I've never been a CEO, but I imagine that as a CEO, you have a lot of people reporting to you and you can tell them what to do. As a product manager, you don't have anyone reporting to you. So it's really about influencing others. And that's where your storytelling and being data-driven and gathering all the evidence and talking with customers is going to help you convince people to align to your vision and solve the customer problem. Yeah, at a high level, product managers, we have to answer 3 questions. We have to answer, what are we building? Why are we building it? And when is it going to be delivered? All of this after coffee at 9 o'clock. But in reality...
9 o'clock.
Yeah, 9 o'clock. No, but in reality, I just want to make this as a very thoughtful answer. Product managers, yes, like you said, we do work a lot. We interact with a lot of people. That doesn't mean that the work has to be 24/7, even weekends. It's not about that. Because in the end, we also depend on other people. So we can't be bugging our team at 2 a.m. unless something is super critical, something is exploding over there. We can't do that. We work some regular hours, and it's a lot about communication with others. Now, I mentioned the 3 questions: what, why, and when. But we have to go deeper than that. And it will depend a lot on the stage of the development, on the stage of the product. Like we, for example, when we talk about the ideation, we're just starting the project, we need to do interviews, surveys, talk to customers, gather the feedback. And we spend a lot of time talking with them. But when we start prototyping, then we have to do our research. We have to plan our roadmap. We have to have that high level agreement with different teams. So it's a different conversation with different people. But then we get into development, and now engineering comes into play, or data scientists, and we need to talk about backlogs and prioritization, develop continuous feedback. And we even talk to finance to say, hey, yes, this is actually a good business for us. Then we come into testing, getting with customers, and finally launching. And that's where we start getting involved with more people like marketing, compliance, getting customer feedback, gather telemetry, improve the product, and it's just a cycle. So there's no typical day-to-day to product management, but it's after coffee, it's time to get things done and talk to everyone. Yeah, that's an interesting question, because it's something that typically when you are thinking of applying to a product management role, you have to look at those skills, right? But like I said, the product management role will depending on the company, the product, and so many other factors. But if I had to select a few of them that, at least to me, are the core skills that every product manager should have, I would start with dealing with ambiguity. In your work as a product manager, every day is full of ambiguity, and you're the one who has to drive clarity and has to get those answers for the team. And if you don't have an answer, if you don't know it, make the connection so that whoever needs an answer finds it right away. So it's your job to deal with that ambiguity. Another very important skill is working cross-functionally. And this is not just knowing how to work with engineering, which is typically what people think as working cross-functionally, but really is, how do you connect what the customer is saying to the marketing language that the folks in marketing need to sell the product, that then goes into the incentives and motivations of the selling team or the partners, that then translates into what are we building so that engineering understands the customer problem and why doing A versus B is important, because if we don't do the right thing, then sales cannot go out there. So working cross-functionally, it's very important. Others that I can think about is leading with influence. Like I said before, it's not about bossing people around, it's convincing them to do something based on the analysis and the research that you did. And other 2 that I would say are also important is communicating with customers. You're going to get yelled at if something doesn't work, but customers will also be excited to test your product, and you have to ride that wave and get help from those customers to improve your product. So you have to understand how to communicate with them. And the last one, and this is especially coming from a business intelligence background, I appreciate that a lot, but it's being data driven. Being data driven means sometimes you need to get your hands dirty, go into the database, get the data that you need to prove a point. And whether that point is developing a new feature, convincing your boss about something or the team about something, you need data. Product managers, we don't wake up and say, I want to change the product because I feel like doing it. I want to change the product, and here's all the evidence of why we should change the product.
Yeah, nice to be here. Thank you for having me. A little bit more about me. As you said, I'm a senior PM at Oracle Cloud. I work on special projects, which is basically anything and everything we need to do in order to delight our customers, make them really happy, help them succeed. Before this, I was at Amazon and I used to own security for the ordering pipeline. Yeah, I studied computer science and finance, and my path and my life led me to being a PM, and I love it. It's absolutely fantastic. So you asked me what a PM is. I think the best way to answer that question is if you ask 6 people what a PM is, you're going to get 7 responses. That's how different and widely varied and differently defined and differently scoped this role is. Each company has their own version. Each team sometimes within a company has its own version. The best way I've ever heard it described is a product manager role is like a white space. So you basically fill in everything that other teams don't and make sure no balls get dropped, and you execute on the customers. The third person might say, hey, a product manager is somebody who is delivering on behalf of the customer. And I want to say all of those things are correct. You're doing all of those things. But what you really do in your day-to-day depends a lot on what is the goal that you're trying to chase. Product managers are working on different goals. I think a huge misconception is that a product manager is working on behalf of an external-facing customer. In huge companies, for example, Amazon and Oracle, a lot of product managers are actually internal-facing. They're product managers whose customers are other teams. For example, you're working on an internal tool to improve developer productivity within your company. You're a product manager and your customers are your company's devs. So really what you're doing is you're making sure you're executing and delivering on a single-handed goal and vision, and you're aligning everybody involved. Now that can include the customers, the stakeholders, your upper management, the engineering team who's going to build it. And my tip around this, or the lesson that I've learned, is when I first started my role, I didn't really know what I was doing. I learned a lot on the job, and I know that's what a lot of people do, but it would be great if you could start putting some definitions and boundaries around what your role looks like. What does success look like to you? What does it mean? How does it translate? Yeah, I think all of those things are really key. And I wish I knew this when I started, that I can define portions of my own role. And that's a segue into how product managers are meant to do a lot. Like I said, we're white space. We fill up at what other people don't and deliver on behalf of our customers. The important thing to note here is that based on your personal goals, you can grow in certain directions if you define your role correctly. So let's say you're somebody, who loves data and you love data-driven decisions. Now, as a product manager, you have to do other things as well, but that could be your core strength and your core competency. You could certainly grow in that area and that regard, but that can only happen, again, if you define your role properly. So that's going to be the first thing. Awesome. So I studied computer science and finance at college. I actually was pretty set on going into the finance side of the world, but I realized that it was very poor work-life balance and I really wasn't enjoying myself. I actually worked in finance right out of college, and I was talking to a couple of friends and they told me about what they're currently doing, which is one of them was working as a product manager. And I didn't even know something like that existed. I actually thought if you study computer science, the few options out of school for you involve coding. Of course, you can go into different managerial tracks and go into different directions, but I thought that is how you start. And that was super eye-opening for me that, hey, this is something that you can do. I found it to be super interesting, applied to a couple companies and studied really hard and cleared the interviews, and then there we went. That is the start of my career. And then I was with Amazon for a couple of years, and now we were talking about the first one of these, which is defining your role, just a little bit earlier, but I want to steer this into a direction, which is, I feel like a lot of people have misconceptions about this role. I talked to a bunch of aspiring product managers, and they're they think this is the role that will cure world hunger. And I just mean it as they actually think this is, you're going to be the CEO of your product and you're going to be awesome and all of these things. And I wish they knew that this role is great. It has a lot of potential. It has a lot of different directions that you can take it. Like we were chatting about defining your role appropriately. But at the same time, it's not really going to cure world hunger. Like it is a pretty challenging role. It is interesting and it involves a lot of incredibly soft skills. And I say that with a grain of salt because I know a lot of people who come into product management are the typical A-type overachievers. They've done super well in school. They've done really well in everything that they've tried. And suddenly they come into this career path, which is pretty uncharted. And just wanted to discuss a few tips, and we talked about the first one, and I can move on to the second one if you'd like.
Yeah, appreciate you having me on. It's always fun to talk about these things. Yeah, I'm not really great at anything. I just do a lot of stuff. So as we look at my experience, I'm an expert at nothing, but I don't know, sometimes that mixed experience is good. It gives us all different perspective. And so my job at Google is really to help make sure that we communicate well out from what are we doing in our products. So I cover things like containers and GKE and serverless and dev tools. And so my outbound product management team works with the PMs, make sure that we can amplify the right message to the market. We work with marketing and field teams and things like that. And at the same time, we listen to a lot of market feedback. I talk to analysts all the time and press and other folks and customers and try to learn what's the market think of the products and then pull that back into our strategy. So it's a fun role to get to sit between both, but I've done product marketing for a number of years, did product management for a few years, did product ownership and architecture and dev and all kinds of wild stuff. So yeah, I like to learn. That's why I teach Pluralsight courses. I figure if I have to teach something, I have to know it first. So at least it forces me to learn topics and things like that. So between that and writing books and pretending to be a decent father to kids, I keep myself busy. Yeah, when I first got hired as a product owner back in, 2012, I had absolutely no idea what that job was. I was fortunate that I was a startup. It was a group where there really wasn't much product management yet. It was very engineering led. And we brought in some folks, including my mentors, Jim Newkirk, who was actually one of the creators of Agile and Scrum and things like that. And so being able to learn firsthand of what does it mean to not just write a requirement spec and chuck it over a wall somewhere and then check back in a quarter or two and see what happened, but to actually sit physically with an engineering counterpart and not just manage a backlog, but write a good user story and sit with an engineer and figure out hey, how do I make sure I don't leak design into this? I'm also just saying, here's an outcome I'm after. And then make sure that whatever comes back is value and then use that, but also talk to customers and say, hey, did this work? Can we feed this back into our next cycle? And so for me, really appreciating that a product owner was an intense stakeholder in the work. It wasn't an arm's length participant. It wasn't someone who sat on a different floor of the building. No, you should be pairing arguably with an engineer and getting just hopefully really rapid feedback. Because look, if it wasn't for Agile, I don't think you need the idea of a product owner. If we were shipping every 3 years, that was the old days. I was in those projects, those big waterfall projects where you did requirements for 9 months, you coded for a few months, and you did a bunch of integration testing for twice as long. And in that world, you are just chucking specs around. You're writing some requirements almost in the abstract. But in this world of, to me, the biggest changes for software teams is moving to small batches. Like small batch delivery is just a fundamental, philosophical change in how you ship software. I am learning quickly, I'm releasing quickly, I'm cutting up giant epic kind of goals into micro releases to learn. And in that model, I don't see how you don't have someone, let's call them a product owner, who is intimately aware of what the customer's kind of after, but can also do a brilliant job of translating that into a workable story. And also, frankly, has a bit of the backbone to prioritize. Because everyone wants to move certain things up and some other person's chirping in your ear this has to be more important or this is harder. And so you have to have a little courage. You have to be a good communicator. Absolutely. And then you have to have enough, I think, technical chops too, to be able to sit with an engineer and effectively understand and translate what actually needs to happen and prove that what they built is the right thing. And then wash, rinse, repeat, do it again and again and again. So I think it's a very underrated role. But if it's done well, it's probably the thing that unlocks good software for most companies. Yeah, and I know when you and I first started talking, you referred to a talk I did at the Agile Alliance a number of years back on this topic. And that was definitely when I was that part of my life. I was coming out of leading VP of product management for this startup, which got acquired by CenturyLink. We did that for a couple of years. We scaled DevOps from 40 people to 400. And we had 30-something product teams. Each product team had a product owner. And so my worldview was very colored by that. I still agree with, I think, everything I mostly said back then. But my idea at the time of product management was different. I think I quoted in that piece or in that presentation, I still like Melissa Perry's definition. Like, product owner is a role, product manager is the job. And so you may have product managers who say, look, my job is to figure out the vision for this product, understand the goals, maybe even do a little bit of the sort of business ops of the product. Hey, what's the business metrics? How's the growth, the customer adoption like? And at the same time, you may be on your team also playing the role of partnering with your eng lead and figuring out, okay, for this sprint, for this release, for this quarter, whatever it is, here are our goals. Here's the sort of things we have to accomplish. Here's the user journeys or user stories. And then maybe dip back into your product manager job in some cases and talk to customers and work with other teams on your go-to-market launch and things like that. So I've worked in places where they're separate and you have a product owner and then you have someone else who sits somewhere as a product manager. My personal experience, I'd have a great experience with that because the product managers were a little too far removed from the product owner work, and each team had their own roadmaps and they weren't in sync. And does this person talk to customers, but the product owner talks to engineers? That's broken, because you really should have the product owner should be able to talk to customers, talk to stakeholders internally. They should be talking to engineers. I think Marty Kagan just said that recently. I thought it was brilliant. So you can't ever lose that. The product owner needs to still be sitting there, readily talking to customers, readily talking to your internal teams that care about your product, and regularly talking to engineers. And that's how Google does that. We really don't have a product owner per se. We have product managers who play that role on their team kind of as that function's needed, but they're also kind of running their product. And so you don't accidentally end up with a split. Now, I'm in outbound product management, which breaks the paradigm even further. Now you have another sort of person in role who also does a lot of customer stuff, does a lot of go-to-market stuff, things like that. So each org will be different. I think for some companies, you might have the process where you need dedicated product owners, especially project by project, product by product. You may have a product management sort of function potentially. I don't believe that's a hierarchy, like product owners report to product managers. I'm not sure that's the thing. But you might have some cases where, look, the product manager is the person who does the work, who does the product owner work, who does some PM work. And you might be at companies where you have product managers and outbound product managers. So there's going to be different paradigms. I think the important thing is who's going to make sure that you don't add a lot of friction between what are we trying to accomplish and how does that get broken into work that engineers can work on. Like, as long as you don't add friction to that and mess up that process, I don't care what you call people. I mean, I'm interested even in what you've seen in some certain cases of that, like what good and bad look like for teams. I mean, a lot of cases, the product owner is a team leader. You're not a passive member of the group. You're setting some vision. The hard part for many people is, I'd be interested in your answer to this. Sometimes I'll ask people during interviews, is the product manager or product owner the CEO of the product? And it's a very polarizing question because some people will violently disagree. Like, product owner is not a CEO. They don't have management responsibility. They don't have a P&L. Other people will answer like, you're kind of setting direction. You set the goals. You're that visionary. I'm not sure which way I fall. I don't think you're the CEO, although I like asking the question, see people's mindset. I'm interested in your take on that as well. But I think that regardless of whether you're the CEO or not, it doesn't matter. You are leading often through influence, not authority. You don't have to listen to a product owner. Now, if you've got a good culture and you have a very strong product and engineering leadership relationship, which to me is the underrated part of a good product org, is how well do the product leader and the eng leader get along? If that's contentious, you are not in a good org. Like, that's a tough place to be. You need someone who has your back up there. And, I've worked at places where, especially at the tier 3 CenturyLink, where the product lead and the eng lead were just like interchangeable in a good way. Like the same page. If an engineer comes up and goes, hey, I don't want to work on that, and they would say, did the product person say we should do it? Yeah, then do it. And it was great to have that sort of backup versus like, I can go tattle to my executive and get something changed. Like, no, they should be on the same page. So a good product owner leads through influence. They don't have direct authority. They don't have a management staff of people. The engineers don't report to them. But you are leading often by showing that you have their back. And for me, again, that was a very underrated aspect. That if you're a good product owner, the engineers think you are covering for them in a good way, that you're protecting their time, that you're not just adding a new feature because someone asked and say, the engineers will figure it out. You destroy credibility instantly when you do that. Instead, it's sure, would you like to add a feature? Awesome. Which one am I going to take out? Well, I don't want to take one out. Cool. You'll wait till the next release then? And the engineers will go like, that person's got me. Like they're not trying to burn me out. They're looking out for my team. So a good leader is kind of respecting their team. They're kind of making sure they're managing a tight scope. They're representing them well. Outbound to that, they're taking their feedback. You're not a dictator. If the engineering team goes, hey, look, our technical debt's about to drown us. If you add one more feature, I'm going to lose my mind. A terrible product owner hears that and goes, okay, here's 5 more features. Suck it up.
Yes.
A good product owner says, okay, I hear you. How about we do at least every other sprint, like 40% technical debt time? And we're going to pay down bugs and we're going to do the right sort of work. Like, how do we find a great balance here? Because you are not the dictator. Your goal is to satisfy all the stakeholders. That's your engineers, that's your customers, that's the internal teams. So for me, those are some things that stand out, but I'm interested in your take as well.
What I've been up to is, I just started my new product manager job at a consulting company. It's been going pretty interesting. I like it a lot, and it's definitely something that could really makes it clear for me that I want to be a product manager long term. Just got back from a 3-month trip in Puerto Rico. I know. So that was fun, and it's a nice transition from San Diego to the hometown of Missouri. I'm not an expert by any means, but just from my experience in the past, it's all about really being mindful in the moment and getting to know the recruiter or whoever you're talking to. So I'll just cover the first conversation, which is usually with a recruiter in tech job. And then obviously R1, R2, R3 is a whole another beast. But with a recruiter, what you really have to understand is you have to just make them like you.
Right.
You have to show up as someone who they're going to be proud of showing it to the hiring manager, right?
Yeah.
You have to be very confident, and you have to also show the recruiter that you're a valuable person.
Yeah.
That you're actually going to come in the company and you're going to change whatever issue that they're having by coming up with a game plan. So my approach as a recruiter is, it's like I would talk to a friend, or honestly, it sounds weird, but like on a date. It's banter. Your only goal is to really get your foot in the door, get them to like you. So usually, honestly, I ask them questions before they ask me any questions. Hey, how's your day going? Talk about the weather a little bit. And then from there on, with the recruiter, especially if it's a technical job, you don't want to go too much into the technicality, the technical words, but you do want to hit the buzzwords. So for product managers, for example, it's a lot of stakeholder management, Agile, Scrum, like customer pain point. And at that point, they know that you have some experience. You know what I mean? Learning from really, really bad experiences where I would just go in a story of literally telling them about each single one of my role. They're bored. I mean, humans have attention span of 20 seconds? Probably less. With TikTok, 6 seconds. So whenever they ask you about walk me through your resume, it's a lot about what my approach is. I talk about my last position, how I came or landed to product management, especially from my biology background. I just explained that a little bit so they don't ask me any questions. And then after that, I really go deeper into whatever experience I am most comfortable talking about. So for me, it was my past job. From there on, I only bring up the buzzwords that I also am really comfortable diving deeper into. And in that way, you're kind of manipulating the conversation to your advantage. So if you don't know anything about A/B testing, don't bring up A/B testing because they're probably going to ask you. Clarifying questions to a recruiter, or just how do I prepare for the next step?
The next step.
Yeah, oh my gosh. This is where you actually can't bullshit. This is where you actually have to know your stuff. And that just means, and don't freak out by this. Again, the practice thing, but also we live in a world where there's so many resources, so much. YouTube videos, Reddit threads, Medium, those are such great places to go to, especially if you have mentors like BKBK as well. You can always kind of ask them. You can use the cohort to really help yourself and, mock interview a lot. But with me, let's say you're interviewing for a business analyst role or a product manager role, it's really important to know exactly what product you worked on. Even as a business analyst, you'll do certain things to kind of help the development of the product.
Absolutely.
So you really have to know the end-to-end product goal and exactly what you did to make that launch happen. An exercise that I do is I wrote down exactly the end-to-end product on a piece of paper, and I did it I went through a thick notebook, probably 2 or 3 times.
Certain features out of it, or just
So just the process. So planning,
ideation.
So first ideation, the next one is whatever, and then it's actually the roadmaps, and then it's launch. And under that, my role with each, and I did that for each of the resume. My biggest mistake in round 2 was going in with the same questions as round one, but round two is very different, a panel. So I do the same thing. I go to their LinkedIn first. I looked at kind of their background. Usually in round one, I will get a good idea of who these people are. I write their names down. I write down their personality, and the hiring managers will usually tell me, this guy's more funny. This guy has a cat. This guy has a dog. So the panel interview, one strategic thing that I do is I look up the problems that my position has when working with that individual. So if I'm a product manager, how do product managers interact with the developers? What are the problems that they have?
Challenges.
And I bring that up. So one of the biggest problems, for example, for product managers is like, product managers sometimes don't consider technical debts, or sometimes they listen too much to the business and they give too much work to the developers, right? And I bring that up. I'm like, as someone who will be joining your organization, I'm going to make sure I give you time in the sprint to look at bugs, or I'll make sure that I'm an advocate for you first before any business. And this comes off as overly optimistic, honestly. And sometimes they just laugh at me, but they know that know that they want to bring me in because they're like, that's really like she's already shooting for the stars, but whatever. At least you'll land on the moon, kind of thing. So I definitely get to know their personalities. For business analysts, definitely for business analysts specifically, you probably want to look at how do they work with the product owners, product managers. For Scrum Masters, it's how do they work with the developers, the product managers, even the business. What are the problems that they face? And then another thing that you really want to do in a panel interview is, again, and I keep saying this, is like, just talk to them like, you're talking to a group of friends. Obviously maintain your professionalism, but it's okay to like laugh with them or look at their background and be like, oh, you paint, that's cool. And it's just like, again, like don't take like the human piece out of the interview process. So first I'll just say like daily activities, but it is a cycle, it's a muscle that you gotta practice. And I'm a biology major, I'm very scientific and just habits, right? And you know that too, like you have to practice something daily. So first thing is write down your pitch, write down your answers, brainstorm everything. Don't just think it in your head, it never goes anywhere really. The second thing is, it's like to-do list. You have to put it down. The second thing is like practice. In front of a mirror, record, listen to yourself talk. And the third thing is like listen to, like interview with a lot of people. Like actually apply to a lot of jobs, maybe some that you aren't even interested in. And then just send out applications and then practice as much as possible before you actually go into a job that you really want. And maybe along the way you'll get really good and you'll actually land at a company that you didn't anticipate for. I did, and it turns out being amazing. So that happens too. And then more of like the scientific approach is, like just don't be too hard on yourself either. I mean, don't be too soft on yourself, like push yourself for sure, challenge yourself, but also know that unless you do some of those technical things that I just mentioned, it's gonna be like 2-year game. Like it's gonna be a long game because you're selling yourself to someone else. It's okay to be sad for a little bit, but be like, okay, you know what? Just one interview, there's 3,000 other companies, like 3 million. How do I record myself, listen to this, face my weaknesses and build upon that? It's super scientific.
All right, that's a wrap with this episode. Thank you for listening till the end. We hope these podcasts are providing value on your Agile journey. If you haven't visited our website, theagilecoach.com, we highly suggest you for other courses and supporting material on your journey. You can also get access to our self-paced courses or learn more about the live training that we provide to become a Scrum Master, Product Owner, Product Manager. With that, we will see you on the next episode. Love and best wishes from the Agile Coach.